Since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022, Ukraine has had to deal with a number of different challenges. Chief among these is the sustainment of Ukraine's active military units as they deal with the ever-threatening Russian onslaught. As the war has progressed, it has become increasingly difficult to fill the demand for manpower and equipment alike. While foreign powers can't help much in terms of recruitment, they have provided a wide variety of different tools to help Ukraine's soldiers, from trucks to tanks, first aid to fighter jets, and rifles to rockets. This is on top of what Ukraine is bringing out of storage, designing and producing themselves, and with a little help from the Russian army, who has generously donated some of their own kit. In this video series, I will be taking a look at the motley assortment of heavy equipment that Ukraine has in service, where it all comes from, and what role it serves. I've already covered Ukraine's fleet of main battle tanks, and now we will turn our attention to their inventory of AIFVs, or infantry fighting vehicles. AIFVs were developed in the early days of the Cold War as a means of providing infantry with a vehicle that would not only transport them to the front line, but also give them direct fire support when battling the enemy. AIFVs are distinct from APCs, or Armored Personnel Carriers, which will be covered in a separate video. The primary difference in function is that APCs are meant to transport troops to the front, but are not supposed to directly engage hostile forces, unlike AIFVs. This means that infantry fighting vehicles are generally much better armed than armored personnel carriers. For example, the most common armament on an APC is a heavy machine gun, while the average AIFV often wields some combination of autocannon, grenade launcher, low-pressure cannon, machine gun, and/or anti-tank guided missile. Some of the vehicles I cover here may blur the line a bit, so don't be surprised if you look them up and find them being called APCs, particularly the wheeled vehicles. I did not really delve into weapon categories in my Heavy Arsenal Part 1 video, since the weaponry amongst all the main battle tanks was pretty uniform, with each entry sporting a main gun between 4 and 5 inches in size, a coaxial machine gun, and options for cupola-mounted machine guns. Since AIFVs can be seen with much more diverse loadouts, here's a quick rundown of the weapons you can expect to see. The general-purpose machine gun, or just machine gun, is a light weapon in relation to armored vehicles that can be utilized for a variety of different roles. While they lack firepower compared to some other weapons used by AIFVs, they are also cheap, easy to maintain, and can be mounted on vehicles with room for thousands of rounds of ammunition. Vehicle-mounted machine guns in Ukraine are almost universally in 7.62 NATO or 7.62 Russian, with the most common machine guns being versions of the FN MAG, like the M240, the MG3, and the BMP Series. Heavy machine guns are heavy not just in the sense that they weigh more, but also fire much more powerful projectiles compared to their smaller brethren. Direct hits on a human being with a round from these types of weapons are almost always fatal, and the average HMG round can penetrate lightly armored vehicles like armored personnel carriers. Weapons in this category fire rounds like 12.7mm Browning, better known as 50 caliber, 12.7mm Soviet, and 14.5mm. Ukrainian weapons in this category include the M2 Browning, the DSHK, often pronounced Dushka, the NSV, and the KPV. Autocannon are the definitive weapon of the modern infantry fighting vehicle. They come in a variety of different calibers, but generally give a vehicle excellent suppressive firepower against not just infantry and buildings, but also armored vehicles. All but the best AIFVs are susceptible to armor-penetrating rounds from autocannon, and in virtually all circumstances, this protection only applies to frontal armor. Multiple incidents have also been documented showing autocannon penetrating main battle tanks from the side or rear. The most prominent autocannon featured in the war so far include the German 20mm RH-202, the American-developed Bushmaster series in 25 and 30mm, the Soviet-era 30mm 2A42, 2A72 and their derivatives, and the Swedish Bofors 40mm L70. Low-pressure guns function in a similar way to the average breech-loaded tank gun. They are much lighter in terms of weight, with the trade-off being lower projectile velocity and accuracy. While not as highly favored as autocannon, they are still quite lethal to lightly armored and soft targets, and remain common on the Ukrainian battlefield, featured mainly in the form of the 2A28 Grom and 2A70 in the BMP series of AIFV. ATGMs can be seen on many AIFVs in different shapes and sizes. I will go more in depth on these armaments on a vehicle-by-vehicle basis. To reiterate, AIFVs are not nearly as well armored as tanks, and are generally only able to provide protection against heavy machine guns and occasionally autocannon. Despite this glaring vulnerability, which has resulted in heavy losses on both sides, infantry fighting vehicles are in high demand due to their versatility. And just like Ukraine's tank fleet, a wide variety of types can be found on the front line. The primary series of IFV seen in operation by the AFU is the BMP lineage. These vehicles were designed by the Soviet Union at different points during the Cold War. Later iterations were improved on in much the same way as can be seen with the T-Series main battle tanks. And like the T-Series in my last video, I will do a quick rundown of the collective BMP family before describing how each model fits into the Ukrainian war. I will also include a brief history of the BMD, which are the BMP's air deployable counterpart. The BMP-1 would enter service with the Soviet Army in 1966, and like the T-64 was quite revolutionary for its time. It could carry 3 crew members and 8 dismounts into battle, and had a variety of weapons to protect itself with. The primary weapon is the 73mm Grom low-pressure gun, a breech-loading cannon that used the same ammunition that was developed for the SPG-9 recoilless rifle. For reaching out to enemy vehicles at a greater distance, the BMP-1 was also armed with the Malyutka ATGM. While this provided some novel protection against NATO vehicles, its archaic aiming and reloading systems mean that all BMP-1s seen on the battlefield in Ukraine today have this weapon removed. BMPs were also equipped with a PKT general-purpose machine gun in a coaxial mount, just like how most tanks were designed. While this was a groundbreaking design for the 60s, the BMP still had its shortcomings, including atrocious ergonomics for the crew and dismounts, lackluster armor, and a rather cumbersome turret, where all 3 of the vehicle's weapons were managed by the gunner alone. Lessons learned from the Yom Kippur War, where Egypt and Syria utilized BMP-1s, contributed to the redesign of the BMP-1 into its successive version, the BMP-2. The BMP-2 first entered service with the Soviet Army in 1980 and could accommodate 3 crew and 7 dismounts. This model of the BMP included important changes, like a new turret that housed both the gunner and the vehicle commander. The low-pressure 73mm cannon was replaced by a 30mm autocannon, which had better range and better suppression capability than its predecessor. The Malyutka was replaced by the Conqueror's ATGM, which was much easier to aim and reload, as well as possessing superior range and penetration. The PKT from the BMP-1 was also seen on the BMP-2 in the same position. Despite losing 1 dismount, the BMP-2 was far more capable than its predecessor when combating all types of threats that it was expected to face on the Cold War battlefield. This was still not enough for the Soviets, however. During the 80s, a light tank prototype was modified to accommodate a new engine and a different turret layout. Eventually, this project would become the BMP-3. This new vehicle was a big departure from the previous 2 models. It was larger than the BMP-1 or 2, and came in at about 4 tons heavier than the standard BMP-2 variants. To compensate for the greater weight, the BMP-3 came equipped with a 500 horsepower engine versus the 300 horsepower models seen on BMP-1 and 2, giving it the best power-to-weight ratio of the series. Its new armor scheme included space plates and is rated against 30mm armor-piercing rounds to the front. Its armament is still considered world-class, consisting of a 100mm low-pressure gun, 30mm cannon, and machine gun. The 100mm rifled gun doubled as a light cannon for use against infantry and fortifications, and as an anti-tank weapon, which could fire the Bastion ATGM. While produced in far lower numbers than its predecessors during and after the Cold War, the BMP-3 remains an incredibly capable IFV. The BMD series is not quite relevant enough to get their own individual entries, so I will briefly describe them here. The BMD was the airborne equivalent of the BMP, small and light enough to be carried in transport aircraft and deployed with paratrooper units. Despite the tight fit, the BMD-1 and 2 could accommodate 2 crew and 6 dismounts. The BMD-1 wielded the same weaponry as its BMP counterpart. The case was the same with the BMD-2, with the exception of the ATGM launcher, which is automated on the BMP-2 versus the simple pintle mount on the BMD-2. Ukraine inherited a massive number of armored vehicles after gaining independence, with some claims giving numbers as high as 13,000. Between the main IFV format and its variants, the newly formed ZSU would have around 2,000 BMP-1s in its inventory. Several hundred would be sold abroad over the coming decades, and others would become inoperable due to exposure and lack of maintenance. The war in Donbass against the pro-Russian separatists took a heavy toll on Ukraine's BMP fleet, with approximately 550 BMP-1 and 2 being destroyed or captured between 2014 and 2021. As the Ukrainian military industry modernized and privatized, it also developed some upgrades for this quite geriatric platform. The first significant program was the BMP-1U upgrade, which was first revealed in 2001. The most noticeable difference is the new Shkval weapon module, replacing the old turret and 73mm gun with a remote weapon station, or RWS, that housed a 30mm autocannon, 30mm grenade launcher, a BMP Series machine gun, and 2 launchers for the Conqueror's or Barrier ATGM. Due to the increase in turret size, which affected internal volume, the number of dismounts this vehicle can accommodate is 6 versus the base BMP-1's 8. Originally 400 of this upgrade was planned, but due to budget issues, that number was drastically reduced to around 30. Half of this total was sold abroad, leaving Ukraine with only a handful of BMP-1Us. The other upgrade that Ukraine would receive is the BMP-1TS. This vehicle mounts the SPIS RWS that uses the same weapons as the Shkval, but with a superior fire control system, thermal optics, and laser rangefinder. The SPIS was also designed to fit into the BMP-1's base turret ring with modification, making installation much cheaper than with other modules. This vehicle was only revealed in 2021 and had a very limited production run before Russia's full-scale invasion. It is difficult to assess how many BMP-1s Ukraine had available on the eve of Russia's full-scale invasion. The Military Balance 2021 estimates Ukraine at having just over 200 BMP-1s in service before February of 2022, though this number is difficult to confirm and does not offer an estimate on how many were in storage. As Ukraine has hastened to establish new units and replace losses in existing ones, all available BMPs have been brought into active service. The high tempo of battle has resulted in heavy attrition, with just over 400 BMP-1s being lost as of March 2024. Despite these casualties, Ukraine has been able to cover its losses in several different ways. First and foremost is that Ukraine had more BMP-1s in storage that were restored and brought into active service. They have also been seen to modify vehicles based on the BMP design to provide additional firepower. The most widely seen example of this is the refitting of the PRP-3, an artillery reconnaissance vehicle, to accommodate a new turret. Multiple examples have been seen mounting turrets from the BMP-1 and BMD-2, giving these obsolete vehicles a new lease on life. Second is that Ukraine has received BMP-1s from a number of Western allies, including 106 from Czechia, 142 from Poland, and 70 that were acquired by Germany through the Rhintausch program from Greek and Slovak stocks. Some of these vehicles had minor quality of life improvements, but did not offer any new capability. All are armed with the 73mm cannon and PKT machine gun. And third is that, just like with tanks, Russia has truly embraced its old communist fraternal tendencies and provided Ukraine with 98 BMP-1s thus far. It is unknown at the time of recording if Ukraine has any plan or capacity to upgrade some of these vehicles, or if its industry is focused elsewhere. Even if it had the facilities to do so, the Ukrainian government or Ukroboronprom may deem it more worthwhile to focus on acquiring modern equipment from other nations. So while this arsenal of museum pieces may not be the ideal tool for the job, fighting an adversary as large as the Russian military means that having old IFVs is better than no IFVs. The BMP-2 would also be inherited in large numbers, approximately 1,250 units, but unlike the BMP-1, which aged rather poorly, the BMP-2 remains a competent IFV to this day. This, combined with budgetary issues, likely led to the decision not to modify Ukrainian BMP-2s from the 90s to the 2010s. According to Ukroboronprom, a handful of BMP-2s were refurbished and upgraded in 2021, adding features like new thermal sights and GPS navigation for the commander. The Military Balance 2021 estimates that Ukraine had around 890 BMP-2s in service before Russia's full-scale invasion. Ukrainian BMP-2s have seen heavy use on all sectors of the front, which can be reflected in their losses, at least 200 according to Oryx as of March 2024. Naturally, Russia has stepped up to plate and has left Ukraine with a rather staggering 256 BMP-2s over the course of the war. This includes a handful of the BMP-2M Berezhak, a modernized BMP-2 with better optics, an added 30mm grenade launcher, and 4 launchers for the Russian Kornet ATGM. The only pledge of BMP-2 from the West was made in October 2023, when Denmark committed to an aid package that would provide funding for 80 vehicles that would be refurbished in Czechia. I could not find any information on whether these vehicles would receive upgrades like the T-72s that the Czechs serviced for Ukraine, nor when the BMPs were expected to be delivered. While there isn't as much attention given to the BMP-2 compared to its Western and Ukrainian-produced counterparts, it still remains a vital tool in Ukraine's arsenal and will probably remain the backbone of the IFV force for the foreseeable future. The BMP-3 was only produced in small numbers before the end of the Cold War, roughly 250 units, though many more would later be produced in Russia. Only 6 are reported to have made their way into Ukraine's inventory during the Soviet split, severely limiting their role within the ZSU. They did not become relevant until combat began against the Eastern Separatists and were photographed in the Donbass around 2015. As the full-scale war progressed after February of 2022, the Russian military left enough serviceable BMP-3s abandoned on the battlefield for Ukrainian units to start pressing them into service. The full number of captured vehicles stands at 64, according to the Oryx database as of March 2024. While still quite rare, the BMP-3 is an exceptional fire support platform that offers a variety of different weapons to tackle the myriad of threats that Ukrainian units face. The BMP series of vehicles are far less numerous in Ukrainian service than their grounded counterparts. Around 250 BMD were inherited from Soviet stocks, including command and support variants, though this video will focus solely on the BMD-1 and 2. These vehicles saw limited service until the 25th Air Mobile Brigade was called into action in the Donbass. BMD-1s and 2s would see action over the years, though it seems that BMD-1 was phased out of service by 2022. Only 6 Ukrainian BMD-2s have been visually confirmed lost since the start of the full-scale invasion, 2 destroyed and 4 captured. It is likely, however, that Ukraine has had a net increase in active BMDs. 56 have been captured by the ZSU, many of which were in good condition at time of capture. They have also captured 11 BMD-4Ms, an advanced Russian airborne IFV that wields the same armament as the BMP-3, though I could not find any evidence of these being pressed into Ukrainian service. Some BMD-2s were also cannibalized for parts or to create the aforementioned PRP-3 conversions. Overall, the BMD-2 is a modest IFV that offers good firepower, especially for such a light platform. They will remain quite rare within Ukrainian ranks, though it is probably safe to assume that where these vehicles go, you will also find elite troops. And while it is unlikely Ukraine will be able to airdrop them into Red Square anytime soon, they will fill a very demanding role on the battlefield for as long as they can be maintained. While all the previously mentioned vehicles were in Ukraine's arsenal in some capacity before the full-scale invasion, this next entry comes entirely from captured Russian stocks. The BTR-82A is a Russian modernization of the BTR-80 armored personnel carrier, a vehicle that will be discussed more thoroughly when I get around to talking about APCs. The key differences compared to older BTRs is the turret sporting a 30mm cannon and new night vision optics, as well as a more powerful engine and improved digital communications equipment for the commander. This was meant to be a cheap way of updating Russia's aging BTR fleet, while newly designed vehicles like the much-paraded Boomerang went into production. As of 2024, however, the Boomerang is nowhere close to entering service, leaving the Russian military with an updated version of a vehicle with design roots dating back to the 1960s. Despite having the armament of an IFV, the BTR-82A is at heart very much still an APC, as it is protected against 50 caliber machine gun fire from the front, but not the flanks or rear. This lack of protection has led to over 650 vehicles being lost by the Russian forces as of March 2024, with 130 examples being visually confirmed to have been captured by Ukraine. Since the BTR-82 shares many parts with Ukraine's own fleet of BTR-80s and uses the same 30mm ammo as its other IFVs, long-term maintenance is not completely out of the question. Using a BTR-82 for frontline duty is probably preferable to having to rely solely on Humvees or other light vehicles. After gaining independence, Ukrainian designers kept up work on a variety of different projects. This included a number of vehicles based off the aging BTR platform, which despite its deficiencies could be modernized. These projects would eventually form into the domestically produced BTR-3 and BTR-4. The BTR-3 was developed by the Kharkiv Morzov Machine Bureau and ADCOM Systems based in Abu Dhabi. It retained many of the BTR's basic features like the large engine in the back of the hull and the side doors for 6 dismounts. Its weapon system would be entirely new, however, fielding the Shkval remote weapon system that was discussed earlier on the BMP-1U. The vehicle was designed with a so-called Unified Fighting Module, which allowed the standard turret to be swapped out for other weapon stations and helped with marketing to foreign customers. The first production version was the BTR-3U, which was built with a German Deutz AG engine. This would be followed by the BTR-3E series, which would mostly utilize the Ukrainian MTU-6R series engine and a new BM3 Sturm turret that carried the same armament as the Shkval. Finishing up the variants is the BTR-3DA, which was purchased and produced solely for the Ukrainian military from 2017 onwards. It wielded a modernized RWS simply dubbed the Sturm M. Altogether, several hundred BTR-3s have been manufactured since 2001, with the majority being exported to customers including Azerbaijan, Chad, Myanmar, Nigeria, Thailand, and the UAE. The Military Balance 2021 estimates that around 60 BTR-3s were in Ukrainian service on the eve of Russia's full-scale invasion. As the name suggests, the BTR-4 was developed as a successor to the BTR-3. Unlike the rest of the BTR entries on this list, the BTR-4 represented a split in design philosophy away from the old Soviet-era model. The engine was moved in between the forward crew compartment and the fighting compartment, allowing the awkward side doors to be removed and replaced by a more conventional ramp in the back. The vehicle driver and commander enter and exit the vehicle through armored doors. Large windshields in the front crew compartment trade protection for visibility. It is most often seen with the Paris remote weapon station, fielding the same weapon layout seen on previous Ukrainian modules, though like the BTR-3, it is designed to accommodate a number of different weapon platforms. The primary AIFV variant is the BTR-4E, which can hold 3 crew and 8 dismounts. Though the standard protection is quite poor, the BTR-4 was built to support add-on armor such as ceramic tiles and slat armor. A prototype dubbed the BTR-4 MV1 was built in 2018, showcasing better overall protection in accordance with NATO standards. As far as we know, however, only the one prototype has been produced. Several hundred BTR-4s have been built in total, with around 100 going abroad to Iraq and Nigeria. Despite initial problems regarding quality control, the BTR-4E made good account of itself during the war in the Donbass. As far as I've been able to find, there's no real solid claim, at least in English, on how many BTR-4s were in Ukrainian service in the first weeks of 2022. Both Ukrainian-produced BTRs have seen heavy use since the start of the full-scale war, with visually confirmed losses of 44 BTR-3 and 94 BTR-4 as of April 2024. These vehicles have been on the front lines of most major campaigns, from Mariupol to Kyiv, Sumy, Lysychansk, Kharkiv, Bakhmut, Robotne, and Avdiivka. One BTR-4 operator in particular provided some of the most intense footage of the war to date, showing his vehicle engage multiple targets at close range, demonstrating the destructive and suppressive capability of autocannons. It is unclear if Ukraine retains its ability to manufacture these BTRs domestically or abroad. Multiple figures within Ukraine's government and defense industry have stated that armored vehicles are amongst the highest priorities for domestic procurement, though it is currently unknown if the planned vehicles are going to be in line with established Ukrainian designs or follow more closely to NATO standards. Regardless of what we see next, the history of the BTR-3 and BTR-4 prove that Ukraine has capable personnel in their ranks, willing and able to create vehicles that are liked by troops at home and attract attention from customers around the world. So while the future of the Ukrainian BTR fleet remains uncertain, the vehicles still in the field will continue to have an impact well into the next year of the war. Well before any modern Western IFVs went to Ukraine as aid, Slovenia donated a sizable portion of its Yugoslav-era BVP M80As. While bearing some resemblance to the Soviet BMP-1, the M80 was an entirely indigenous design, entering active service with the Yugoslav People's Army in 1982. These vehicles can accommodate a crew of 3 and 7 dismounts, and are armed with a 20mm autocannon, 2 launchers for the Malyutka ATGM, and a general-purpose machine gun. Slovenia has around 62 in inventory after the breakup of Yugoslavia, 35 of which were pledged to Ukraine in June of 2022. Ukraine's BVP M80s would quickly find their way to the front line, where they would see heavy use during the Battle of Bakhmut in early 2023 and beyond. As of April 2024, 8 have been confirmed destroyed or damaged in action. It is unlikely Ukraine will ever receive any direct replacements for units lost. Slovenia likely handed over all of its remaining inventory of M80s, leaving Croatia and Serbia as the only other operators of this family of IFV, neither of which have shown much interest in providing Ukraine with heavy equipment. Much like the M55S tanks also provided by Slovenia, the BVP M80 acts as a stopgap vehicle. While it lacks many of the bells and whistles seen on more advanced Western IFVs, the M80 is at the very least better armed than the more numerous BMP-1 and probably a little bit less agonizing to move around in. It still remains to be seen if Ukraine will get more desperately needed infantry fighting vehicles, but for the time being, the BVP M80 will be around to help plug the gap in a category of vehicle that is always in high demand. Starting off our list of NATO-produced IFVs is probably the most iconic entry on this list, the M2 Bradley. The Bradley program began as a direct response to the Soviet BMP and would become the culmination of a new generation of armored fighting vehicles built by the United States with new technologies. It was intended that the Bradley would be able to easily keep pace with the M1 Abrams tank, enhancing American units' capability in combined arms warfare. Despite what Major James Burton would have you believe, the Bradley was not just a big scandal of electronics and aluminum. Trends in technology and doctrine development are often difficult to predict, but the Bradley would successfully pass on many accounts. It offered good protection compared to its armored personnel carrier predecessor, the M113, with the first Bradley variants capable of protecting against 14.5mm machine gun rounds. Later variants with better armor and additional add-on armor kits could potentially protect against autocannons up to 30mm in size. The Bradley was also well armed, sporting a stabilized 25mm autocannon and a general-purpose machine gun in the turret, as well as a deployable launcher for 2 TOW anti-tank missiles. The M2 Bradley entered active service in 1981 and has seen combat in multiple conflicts. In 1991, during Operation Desert Storm, the Bradley was credited with more Iraqi tanks destroyed than the M1 Abrams, proving its capacity to engage armored targets. The M2 was produced until 1995 and has been extensively upgraded to compete with other vehicles. It remains in service today with the United States, Saudi Arabia, Croatia, Lebanon, and now Ukraine. The U.S. government made an initial pledge of 50 Bradleys in January of 2023, with subsequent pledges bringing the total promised to Ukraine up to 186 vehicles. The variant provided by the United States is the M2A2 ODS-SA, with ODS standing for Operation Desert Storm and the SA for Situational Awareness. What that means is that these vehicles were upgraded in the aftermath of Desert Storm and incorporated lessons learned during the Bradley's engagements. These upgrades included a new laser rangefinder and navigation system, a thermal imager for the driver, and space for an additional dismount, bringing the troop compartment capacity up to 7. The Bradley has been seen primarily in use with Ukraine's 47th Mechanized Brigade, participating in the summer 2023 counteroffensive and defending against the Russian winter offensive near Avdiivka. Losses of the Bradley were quite heavy during its debut in Zaporizhia, where many vehicles got bogged down in minefields. As of April 2024, 76 Ukrainian Bradleys have been lost, with about half destroyed and the other half damaged and/or abandoned. Despite its rather clumsy introduction into the fray, Bradleys have become key components of Ukraine's defense against Russian wave assaults along the front in the Donbass. Video emerged recently of Bradleys hitting a number of Russian targets, including drone footage of 2 rather tenacious crews engaging a T-90M tank at point-blank range. While the autocannons couldn't penetrate the tank's armor, they did enough damage to the vehicle's optics and hydraulics to prevent it from firing back, forcing the Russian tank to retreat and crash a short distance away from the battle site. More than any other Western IFV, the Bradley is available in large quantities in storage sites across the United States and could quickly provide Ukraine with a more robust fleet of armored vehicles. This has not been the case, though, much to the Ukrainian government and soldiers' dismay. Constant infighting amongst the American Congress and Senate has put Ukraine aid to a halt, with the upcoming 2024 election likely to decide whether the United States continues to provide any aid at all. Whether or not the issue is resolved in Ukraine's favor, the Bradleys that have been provided thus far have already shown their combat prowess engaging a variety of targets. After extensive deployment to the Middle East, the Bradley is now doing what it was originally built to do, killing Russians on the plains of Europe. Following up one Cold War veteran with another, we have the West German-developed Marder 1. The Marder started development in the 1960s as a replacement for the early Cold War Schützenpanzer HS-30, which was plagued with reliability issues and political scandal for the duration of its service. After a decade of testing, the first production Marders would be delivered to the Bundeswehr in 1971. These vehicles were armed with a 20mm autocannon and a coaxial general-purpose machine gun. Early models had a second machine gun on a remote-controlled mount above the exit doors of the vehicle, though this weapon was omitted from later models. From 1975 onwards, the Marder was also equipped with a Milan anti-tank guided missile launcher above the commander's seat on the turret. Unlike the Bradley, however, the commander would have to expose himself in order to operate the launcher. Early versions of the Marder were armored against 20mm discarding sabot rounds to the front and heavy machine gun fired to the sides and rear. Variants from the Marder 1A3 onwards would be up-armored specifically to protect against 30mm cannons seen on the BMP-2 and from armor-piercing cluster munitions. All later production models of the Marder are configured to fit 3 crew and 6 dismounts. As the number would indicate, the Marder 1 was supposed to have been replaced by a successor Marder 2. This vehicle started development in 1984, but due to the end of the Cold War and thawing of relations between East and West, the Marder 2 program was completely cancelled by 1992. The Marder 1 would carry into the 21st century with little modification, seeing service in a reunified Germany alongside Chile, Greece, Indonesia, and Jordan. Ukraine would receive an initial pledge of 40 Marder 1s in January of 2023, with subsequent pledges bringing the number up to 140 vehicles as of April 2024. All vehicles pledged are of the Marder 1A3 variant, which have not been modified since the 90s, but still provide an all-around better vehicle than the BMPs of the same era. Marder 1s have so far seen action on the key battlegrounds of 2023, participating in the Ukrainian summer offensive near Robotny and the winter defense around Avdiivka. As of April 2024, 13 Marders have been confirmed lost or damaged in action. There are still an estimated 1,000 Marders in storage sites around Germany in various states of disrepair. As the German government gears up to provide Ukraine with over 8 billion euros in aid during 2024, it is not unreasonable to think that more IFVs will be included as part of future deliveries. The Bundeswehr is also gradually replacing its fleet of active Marders with the Schützenpanzer Puma, which may free up well-maintained Marders for Ukraine on top of ones in storage. Even though the Marder 1 is well past its prime, it can still compete effectively with other Cold War-era equipment seen in use by both Ukraine and Russia. The war it was designed for never came about, but the war in Ukraine has given the Marder a new lease on life. At the same time that Ukraine received its pledges of Bradleys from the United States and Marders from Germany, Sweden joined the chorus by pledging its own IFV, the Stridsfordon 90, or simply CV-90. The CV-90 began development in the early 80s and was intended to provide the Swedes with a modern infantry fighting vehicle that was easy to maintain and well armed. Standard armament consists of a turret with a coaxial machine gun and 40mm autocannon, almost the largest of its class. Protection on early variants of the CV-90 was rated against heavy machine gun fire, with later armor packages enhancing protection specifically to counter Soviet 30mm autocannon. All IFV variants are built to accommodate 3 crew and between 6 and 8 dismounts. As of 2024, around 1,200 CV-90s have been produced for service with Sweden and customers abroad, including Denmark, Estonia, Finland, the Netherlands, Norway, and Switzerland. Several different turret configurations with different weapon systems are also used by foreign customers, resulting in CV-90 variants retroactively having the caliber of the weapon added to the name. For example, the CV-90 with the 40mm cannon becomes the CV-90-40. The 50 vehicles pledged to Ukraine in January of 2023 are the CV-90-40C, the most modern version of the standard IFV in service with the Swedish military. Ukraine also received a top-secret Swedish bioweapon, which according to Russian sources was developed deep within the LGBT NATO Mi-6 Zelensky Zionist biolabs. This weapon is so feared that any mention of its presence on the battlefield will send soldiers on both sides into a feral frenzy from which there is no recovery. I am of course talking about surströmming. Delivery of CV-90s to Ukraine started in June of 2023 and have since been seen in the hands of the 21st and 93rd Mechanized Brigades. They have engaged in combat in the Luhansk Oblast around Kreminna and Bakhmut. As of April 2024, 5 have been confirmed lost or damaged in combat. In June of 2023, Ukraine also signed a joint declaration with the Czech Republic and Slovakia with the intent of all 3 nations to acquire CV-90s. In September, Ukrainian Defense Minister Hanna Maliar announced a goal of procuring 1,000 vehicles, as well as setting up production in Ukraine. While this plan sounds rather ambitious, it highlights the importance Ukraine places on acquiring modern IFVs in significant quantities. The CV-90 is a large and modular platform that can be tailored to Ukrainian demands and better streamline logistics in the future. Whether the production plan falls through or not, it is clear that the CV-90 has garnered attention both in the Ukrainian Rada and on the battlefield, demonstrating its capability as one of the best IFVs available on either side. The final major entry on our list is the K2 Rosomak. The Rosomak is a Polish-produced wheeled IFV based on the Finnish Patriot AMV pattern of armored vehicles. Poland acquired the license to produce the Rosomak after its Ministry of National Defense tested several platforms to replace the nation's aging fleet of OT-64 APCs and BMP-1s, both of which were nearing 4 decades of service. The contract was signed in late 2002 with an initial plan to produce 690 vehicles of all variants. Production began in 2004 and continues to this day, with contract extensions bringing the total number of vehicles produced to over 1,000. The primary fighting vehicle variant of the Rosomak can fit 3 crew and 8 dismounts. I had a tough time finding solid information on protection, though the Rosomak should be able to deal with heavy machine gun fire to the front at minimum. If anyone has more solid sourcing on this topic, I would greatly appreciate some direction. Armament consists of a coaxial general-purpose machine gun and a 30mm Bushmaster 2 cannon, with options for grenade launchers and ATGMs. Before being sent to Ukraine, the Rosomak had seen limited combat on deployment with Polish troops in Afghanistan, where several vehicles had been hit with RPGs but managed to return to base under their own power. These vehicles were not provided as aid by Poland, but were instead purchased by Ukraine with assistance from the United States and the EU. The deal consisted of 200 vehicles, 100 of which would be provided from existing Polish stocks, while the other 100 would be newly manufactured units. While I could not find information on when the newly produced vehicles were due to arrive, the first vehicles from Polish inventory began arriving in July of 2023. They have since been seen in operation with the 21st and 44th Mechanized and 57th Motorized Brigades. Despite arriving too late for the start of the summer counteroffensive, the Rosomaks quickly got into combat in Bakhmut and later Avdiivka. As of April 2024, visually confirmed losses stand at 4 vehicles destroyed or damaged. Altogether, the Rosomak can provide a much-needed boost in capability to a force that has seen heavy attrition for over 2 years now. While not an exact analog, these vehicles can do much to replace the BTR-3s and BTR-4s that Ukraine has lost and may have trouble replacing elsewhere. As the fall of Avdiivka has caused a change of pace after over a year of fairly static warfare, Ukraine might need to rely even more on its fleet of IFVs to get troops into and out of hot zones in order to combat stubborn Russian assaults. Last up is the AIFV-B. This entry is more of an honorable mention, as we have very little information on how these IFVs got to Ukraine, who sent them, or how many there are. The AIFV is a development of the M113 armored personnel carrier that was tested in the United States but never pressed into service. It did gain fanfare in other countries, however, and would go on to be produced in the thousands by Belgium and the Netherlands. The vehicles seen in Ukraine are likely Belgian, which can be determined by the placement of the smoke launchers on the turret, versus the Dutch version, which has the launchers on the front of the hull. The AIFV is armed with a 25mm Oerlikon autocannon and a coaxial machine gun, and can accommodate a crew of 3 with 7 dismounts. The autocannon can utilize the same ammunition used on Ukraine's M2 Bradleys, and the vehicle itself shares many components with the BTR-3 APCs that were donated by the Dutch government. Both of these help lessen the stress placed on the Ukrainian logistics network. While it remains unknown if more of these vehicles will make their way into Ukraine, their counterpart APCs have proven very popular, and thus it is not too much of a stretch to say that more AIFVs would be welcome with open arms. So what do all of these infantry fighting vehicles leave Ukraine with? Perhaps unsurprisingly, more logistical problems is one of the answers. Between all the vehicles discussed in this video, Ukraine must source at least 8 different types of ammo for the primary weapons of its IFVs. Spare parts have also become a large concern in the last several months, with several different platforms across all categories of armored vehicles becoming more difficult to field due to parts shortages. The lack of any aid from the United States for the last several months, and the absence of urgency seen in many European governments, has placed Ukraine in a very precarious situation, to say the least. IFV losses have decreased slightly since the end of the summer counteroffensive. Many are currently being utilized to conduct small-scale raids on Russian positions, or as quick reaction units to plug gaps in the line of defense. If Ukraine is to ever have any hope of taking back its lost territory, one of the tools it will need are more IFVs. Despite their vulnerability, they provide a great degree of versatility and good protection for infantry that need to reach the front. Where these vehicles will come from remains uncertain. In the long term, Ukraine may be able to finalize a contract with the Swedes for production of the CV-90 domestically or abroad. If the next US administration is willing to provide aid, it likely won't reach Ukraine until summer of 2025. The short term looks even more desperate. Germany is doing all it can by providing a number of different systems, and just recently announced a new batch of Marders to be refurbished, along with some upgrades in the form of new laser rangefinders. Ukraine may still have some BMP 1s and 2s in storage that can be refurbished or upgraded with the help of the Czechs, but with the lack of information from Ukroboronprom or the Ukrainian government, domestic capacity is largely an anomaly. For the time being, just as with their MBTs, Ukraine is going to have to make do with their current hodgepodge of IFVs. It may be a difficult situation, but the pressure is not exclusive to their own forces. Ever since the Russians started their concentrated assaults on Avdiivka in October of 2023, their attrition rates for all frontline vehicle types have skyrocketed. Over time, some units have been equipped not with new or refurbished BMPs, but with converted artillery tractors, Chinese ATVs, and Ural trucks fitted with anti-drone cages. So while Russia may have the initiative at the moment, it is not guaranteed to hold or remain sustainable indefinitely. For both combatants, then, it is a race against time. For Ukraine, it is the waiting game on when they can get substantial aid. For Russia, a game of how long their stockpiles of Soviet legacy equipment will last for. Though it is difficult to say how much any one factor has contributed to the course of the war thus far, I think it is fairly uncontroversial to say that Ukraine's IFVs have done their job of assisting infantry and providing fire support. I'm inclined to agree with the YouTuber Perun in his assessment that there is a correlation between equipment being supplied by Ukraine's partners and the tempo of the war changing, even if ever so slightly. Infantry fighting vehicles might not be the ultimate pivot point, but with the provision of more vehicles from abroad, assistance in repairing and refurbishing current vehicles, and consolidating domestic industry, Ukraine can use these vehicles to save more lives on the battlefield in this unforgiving war of attrition. As a final note, I wanted to thank everyone who helped with this project. It took a lot longer to complete than I wanted, but it is finally available. I will try to credit as many of the contributors as possible in the bibliography that can be found in the video description. If you think you deserve to be on that list but don't see your name, be sure to let me know. For future content, Part 3 will be focused on self-propelled artillery and rocket systems. This may be an even more ambitious project than the last two, so I will probably try to break up the monotony by posting some smaller videos that focus on one specific vehicle or a different topic entirely. If you guys have any suggestions for what types of content you'd like to see, let me know in the comments and I'll see what I can do. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you all next time.